The evening was unusually quiet in the suburban neighborhood where Elizabeth Carter lived. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and a faint orange glow clung to the sky, slowly giving way to deepening shades of purple. The world outside seemed still, almost too still. Elizabeth sat alone in her living room, the dim light of a single lamp pooling softly on the carpet. In her hand was a delicate porcelain cup, half filled with chamomile tea that had already gone lukewarm. Her eyes wandered absent-mindedly across the room. The framed photographs on the wall stared back at her, snapshots of another time. There was one of her late husband, Robert, smiling wide with his arm around her at a family picnic. Another showed their children when they were young, both now grown and living far away, busy with families of their own. Each picture was a frozen memory, reminding her of a life once full of noise, laughter, and love. Now, silence had become her constant companion. Elizabeth sighed softly. Loneliness had a way of sneaking up on her at night, wrapping itself around her like a heavy blanket. She took another sip of her tea and set the cup down with a faint clink. Just then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed something outside, the flicker of the garage light. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then the bulb stuttered again, buzzing faintly before plunging the driveway into darkness. It came back on with a weak glow, flickered twice, and then steadied. Elizabeth frowned. That garage light had been there for years, faithfully illuminating her driveway every night. It was Robert who had installed it back when the kids were still in high school. He had insisted on doing it himself, refusing to hire an electrician. "No one knows this house better than I do," he had said with a wink, before climbing up the ladder. But Robert was gone now, and Elizabeth had no idea how to fix it. She wasn't helpless, but tools and wires had never been her strength. The thought of climbing a ladder, unscrewing the bulb, or fiddling with circuits made her nervous. And yet, the garage light wasn't just about convenience. It was about safety. She didn't like the idea of her home cloaked in darkness. She made a mental note to call a handyman tomorrow, though she dreaded the thought of explaining her situation to yet another stranger. She was careful about who she allowed into her home. As she got up to close the curtains, the silence of the night was suddenly broken by a sharp, unexpected sound. A knock on the door. Elizabeth froze. Her heart skipped a beat. At this hour, an unannounced visitor was unusual. Slowly, she turned toward the door, her pulse quickening. She wasn't used to company, especially after sundown. The neighborhood was quiet, safe even, but still, who could it be? The knock came again, firm yet not aggressive. Whoever it was, they weren't giving up easily. Elizabeth hesitated. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Should she answer it? Should she pretend she wasn't home? She glanced at the garage light outside, still faintly flickering. Could it be a neighbor checking in? Or perhaps someone selling something? Taking a cautious step toward the door, she peeked through the small side window. What she saw made her pause. Standing on her porch was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of rich mahogany. He wore a simple work shirt and jeans, with a tool belt slung around his waist. In his hand, he held a small flashlight, which he clicked off as he noticed her shadow move near the door. His posture was calm, not threatening, and he waited patiently, hands relaxed at his sides. Elizabeth's breath caught. She didn't recognize him. He wasn't from her neighborhood, at least not from what she remembered. Her instincts told her to be careful, but something about the way he stood, the way he carried himself, didn't feel dangerous. She unlocked the door slowly, opening it just a crack. "Yes?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. The man gave a polite nod, his deep voice warm and respectful. "Good evening, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. My name's Marcus. I've been working in this neighborhood today, helping folks with small repairs, light fixtures, broken hinges, things like that. I noticed your garage light flickering when I walked by. Thought I'd check if you needed a hand with it." Elizabeth blinked. The directness of his words caught her off guard. A stranger offering to fix something at her house? In this world, where scams and danger seemed to lurk behind every corner, it almost sounded too good to be true. Still, she studied his face. His eyes met hers, steady and genuine. There was no pushiness, no rush, only calm patience. He even stepped back slightly, creating space so she wouldn't feel pressured. I I don't usually let strangers do work around here, Elizabeth admitted cautiously. Marcus nodded, as if he expected that response. I completely understand, ma'am. My mama taught me that trust has to be earned. I'm not here to cause trouble. Just thought I'd offer. If you prefer, I can leave you my card, and you can call me later if you change your mind. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Elizabeth could tell he wasn't trying to sell her something she didn't need. He had noticed her problem and offered a solution, nothing more. And truthfully, she did need help. The garage light flickered again, almost as if mocking her hesitation. Finally, she exhaled softly. It's just a garage light. It's been acting up all evening. If you know how to fix it, I'd appreciate it. A faint smile spread across Marcus's face. Not a triumphant grin, but a kind, reassuring smile. Yes, ma'am. I'll take care of it. He waited for her permission before stepping onto the driveway, carefully keeping his movements unthreatening. Elizabeth watched from the doorway, her fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe. Something about him, his steady hands, his calm tone, his respectful manners, was oddly comforting. She still didn't know him, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. As Marcus unpacked a small toolkit, Elizabeth thought to herself, what are the chances? A stranger knocking at the exact moment. I needed help. It felt unusual, almost as if life had sent him there for a reason. For a moment, she wondered what Robert would say if he were alive. He'd probably laugh and say, sometimes help comes from unexpected places, Liz. She smiled faintly at the thought, her heart softening. The night air carried a cool breeze as Marcus positioned his ladder under the flickering light. Elizabeth stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed against the chill, watching him work. And though she didn't realize it yet, that knock on the door was about to change more than just a faulty light bulb. It would spark a conversation, a connection, and a lesson that would linger in her heart long after the light was fixed. Marcus steadied the ladder with one hand and tightened the final screw of the garage light fixture. Elizabeth watched him carefully from a few feet away, standing with her arms folded. The night air carried a soft chill, and a faint hum of crickets filled the silence. She wasn't usually one to hover when someone was working, but something about Marcus's calm focus made her stay. He moved with precision, not rushing, not fumbling, each motion careful and deliberate. His broad shoulders flexed slightly as he adjusted the bulb, and Elizabeth noticed how naturally he handled the tools, as though they were an extension of his own hands. To her surprise, she found herself feeling curious. This man wasn't just a stranger fixing her garage light. There was a quiet presence about him that made the silence feel less empty than it usually did. Breaking the stillness, she finally spoke. So do you do this often? Helping people with repairs, I mean. Marcus paused, glanced down from the ladder, and gave a small chuckle. Yes, ma'am. Pretty much every day. Some folks call it odd jobs. Others call it handyman work. I just call it helping out. Elizabeth tilted her head slightly. His voice was deep, steady, and oddly reassuring. So you go from house to house fixing things? He nodded, carefully testing the bulb before continuing. That's right. My dad used to tell me, son, there's always something broken in this world, and if you got two hands, you might as well help fix it. Something in those words made Elizabeth smile faintly. She remembered Robert, her late husband, saying things in a similar way, always with a lesson hidden in everyday chores. It was strange, almost comforting, hearing Marcus echo something so familiar. She leaned against the porch railing, her voice softening. Your father sounds like a wise man. Marcus gave a half smile, a shadow passing briefly across his face. He passed a few years ago, but I carry his lessons with me every day. Fixing things isn't just about tools and screws. It's about showing people that someone cares enough to make their lives a little easier. Elizabeth's chest tightened. She hadn't expected such depth in his answer. She had thought he might shrug it off with a simple yes or no. But here was a man who clearly carried meaning in his work, someone who didn't just see repairs as labor, but as an act of service. She studied him a little more closely. His clothes were simple but neat, his hands strong and sure, his expression open yet guarded, as if life had taught him to be careful about what he shared. You sound different, she said, almost without thinking. Marcus raised an eyebrow, glancing down at her with curiosity. Different how, ma'am? Elizabeth hesitated, realizing how her words might sound. I mean, different in a good way. Most people, when they talk about work, they just complain about it. But you talk about it like it's something bigger, like it matters. Marcus's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. That's because it does matter. My mom raised me and my two younger sisters all by herself. She worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. We didn't have much, but she always said, Marcus, no matter how hard life gets, make yourself useful. Be the kind of man who leaves a place better than he found it. Elizabeth felt a lump in her throat. There was something deeply moving about hearing him speak of his mother with such respect. She could almost picture the young boy he must have been, helping around the house, learning how to fix things not just because he wanted to, but because he had to. For a moment, she was quiet, lost in thought. Finally, she said softly, she raised you well. Marcus looked down at her, his smile small but genuine. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot. The bulb flickered once, then steadied, shining brightly against the night. Marcus tested it again, making sure it was secure. Satisfied, he climbed down the ladder with careful steps and began packing his tools. Elizabeth lingered, not ready for the conversation to end. The words came out before she could stop herself. You know, my husband used to fix everything around here. I never had to worry about light bulbs or leaky faucets. He was the type of man who believed he could build or repair anything with his own two hands. Marcus glanced at her, sensing the weight in her voice. Sounds like he was a good man. She nodded slowly, her eyes growing distant as memories surfaced. He was strong, dependable. He's been gone for 6 years now. Sometimes I still catch myself waiting to hear the sound of his hammer in the garage, or the way he'd mutter under his breath when he was trying to fix something. The ache in her chest was familiar, but tonight, speaking it aloud felt different. Usually, she kept her grief tucked away, hidden in the silence of her home. But sharing it with Marcus didn't feel heavy. It felt like setting down a burden she had been carrying too long. I'm sorry for your loss, Marcus said gently. His tone carried no pity, only respect. Grief doesn't leave easy. My mama says it's the price we pay for loving deeply. Elizabeth's eyes watered, though she quickly blinked the tears away. His words pierced straight into her heart. She swallowed hard and managed a small smile. Your mama sounds like a very wise woman. She is, Marcus agreed, tough as nails, but her heart's pure gold. There was a pause, comfortable this time. The kind of pause where silence wasn't empty but full of understanding, full of unspoken words that didn't need to be said. Elizabeth realized she hadn't felt this kind of connection in years. Here she was, standing on her porch with a stranger who had walked into her evening by chance, or maybe by fate, and she felt less alone than she had in a long time. Her mind wandered. She wondered what her children would think if they knew she was standing outside talking to a young man she'd just met. They would probably worry, maybe even disapprove. But in this moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the honesty in Marcus's eyes, the sincerity in his voice, and the way his presence seemed to fill the quiet spaces of her lonely evening. As Marcus bent down to pack away his tools, Elizabeth caught herself studying him more closely. The way he carried himself, the gentleness behind his strength, and before she realized it, the words were already on the tip of her tongue. But that was for later. For now, she simply stood there, grateful for the unexpected conversation that had unfolded from something as simple as a broken garage light. And though she didn't know it yet, this was just the beginning of a connection that would challenge her perceptions, test her courage, and remind her the power of human kindness in the most unexpected places. The soft click of Marcus's tools snapping shut broke the silence of the night. He had finished tightening the final screw, and now the garage light glowed steadily above them, no longer flickering or buzzing. Its bright, warm glow spread across the driveway like a small victory, pushing away the creeping shadows that had settled there for hours. Elizabeth found herself clapping lightly, almost like a child who had just witnessed a small magic trick. She hadn't expected it to work so quickly, and yet there it was, steady, reliable light shining against the darkness. You did it! she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and admiration. "It hasn't worked properly in weeks, and now look at it." Marcus smiled, brushing his hands against his jeans, as if dusting off invisible dirt. "It wasn't too bad, ma'am. Just a loose connection. Sometimes all it takes is tightening the right thing." Elizabeth stood there, gazing up at the light, and then back at Marcus. She wasn't sure what it was. Maybe the calm way he had handled everything, or the kindness that seemed to linger in his tone. But something stirred within her. She felt lighter. And then, without warning, the words slipped out of her mouth. "You're handsome, you know that?" The compliment hung in the air like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples in every direction. Elizabeth froze instantly, her eyes widening in disbelief at what she had just said. Heat rushed to her cheeks, painting them crimson beneath the glow of the fixed garage light. "Why did I say that?" she thought frantically. Why on earth would I say something like that out loud? She wasn't the type of woman who flirted or tossed out compliments carelessly, especially not to younger men, and certainly not to strangers who showed up at her door. Yet here she was, standing on her driveway, looking into the eyes of this tall, kind-hearted man, and blurting out the very first thought that had come to her. Marcus blinked. For the first time since he'd introduced himself, he looked caught off guard. His strong hands, usually so steady, paused mid-motion as he slid the last tool into his bag. He glanced at her, then away, as if searching for the right response. Elizabeth's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to snatch the words back, erase them, pretend they'd never happened. She opened her mouth to explain, to smooth things over, but nothing came out. Instead, silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward, filling the cool night air. Finally, Marcus broke it. His lips curved into a modest smile, not wide, not teasing, but shy, almost boyish. His gaze dropped to the ground before lifting gently back to her. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. His tone carried no arrogance, no suggestion of taking advantage, only humility. It was as though the compliment had caught him by surprise, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. Elizabeth exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her chest in embarrassment. "Oh, dear, I didn't mean, well, of course I meant it, but I didn't mean to just blurt it out like that." She shook her head, laughing nervously at herself. "I'm not usually so forward." Marcus chuckled softly, his voice like a calm breeze easing the tension. "It's all right. Not every day I hear that while fixing a light bulb." His good-natured response eased some of her embarrassment, though her cheeks still burned. She found herself studying him again, noticing not just his appearance, his strong jawline, the kind expression in his eyes, the confidence in his posture, but also something deeper. Handsome wasn't just about looks, she realized. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet dignity he brought into every word, every action. But she couldn't explain all of that to him, not without sounding foolish. So she simply smiled and said softly, "Well, you should hear it more often." Marcus tilted his head, as though he wasn't sure what to make of that. "Maybe, but my mama always told me, looks don't mean much if your heart's not right. So I try to keep my heart in check first." The sincerity in his words disarmed Elizabeth even further. She had expected him to brush off the compliment or maybe laugh about it. But instead, he had turned it into something meaningful, something rooted in values and humility. Her chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was admiration, yes, but also a kind of sadness. For years, she had been surrounded by silence, her conversations limited to quick phone calls with her children or polite exchanges at the grocery store. Yet here was this stranger, standing in her driveway, speaking with a wisdom and warmth that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. For a brief moment, her mind wandered back to Robert. He had been handsome, too, in a rugged, dependable sort of way. He had been the type of man who could fix anything with his hands but still made time to hold hers when she needed comfort. She had thought that kind of presence, that kind of goodness, had vanished from her life forever. And yet, standing before her was Marcus, reminding her what it felt like to be in the company of someone whose character shone brighter than any light bulb. Elizabeth cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. "You're very humble, Marcus. That's rare these days." He shrugged lightly, as if humility came as naturally to him as breathing. "Just the way I was raised, ma'am. My mama used to say, 'The world might judge you by how you look, but the Lord will judge you by how you love.' So I try to love people right, even if all I'm doing is fixing a light." The word struck her deeply. She found herself staring at him, caught between admiration and gratitude. Here she was, a lonely widow, standing outside her home at night, and a chance encounter had turned into something more, a conversation that stirred her heart in ways she hadn't expected. For a moment, she wondered what the neighbors might think if they were watching. An older white woman and a younger black man, standing close, talking, exchanging compliments. She imagined the whispers, the raised eyebrows, and yet, strangely, she didn't care. What mattered was the honesty of the moment, the kindness in his eyes, the reminder that connection could be found in the most unexpected places. She smiled again, softer this time, less embarrassed and more genuine. "Well, Marcus, whether you believe it or not, I think you should hear more often. You are handsome, inside and out." Marcus's eyes widened slightly at her boldness, but he didn't look away. Instead, he gave her a nod, his smile modest but real. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." And just like that, the tension dissolved, replaced by something lighter, something that hovered between them like an unspoken understanding. The compliment, awkward at first, had become a bridge, connecting two people from different worlds, different generations, and different experiences. Elizabeth didn't realize it yet, but that simple moment, those simple words, would echo long after night ended. Because sometimes it only takes one honest compliment to remind someone of their worth, to break down walls of silence, and to spark a connection that could change everything. The night had settled fully now, wrapping the neighborhood in a calm hush. The repaired garage light glowed brightly above them, a steady beacon against the darkness, illuminating the driveway where Elizabeth and Marcus stood. What had begun as a simple repair was now becoming something much more, something Elizabeth hadn't felt in a very long time. Conversation that mattered. At first, she was embarrassed about her impulsive compliment, but Marcus's humility had diffused the awkwardness. It seemed to unlock something between them, as though a heavy door that had been bolted shut in Elizabeth's heart creaked open, letting warmth spill through. She looked at him more closely now, not with the cautious distance she had when he first knocked, but with a genuine curiosity. "Marcus," she began gently, "if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn all of this?" "Fixing lights, repairing things. You make it look so natural." Marcus, who had just tucked his screwdriver back into his tool belt, leaned lightly against the ladder and exhaled as though weighing how much to share. "My dad taught me most of it. He was a mechanic, worked on cars all his life. Said a man ought to know how to use his hands. But it wasn't just him. My mama, too, she worked long shifts as a nurse. Whenever something broke in the house, we couldn't always afford to hire someone, so we learned to fix it ourselves. Pipes, locks, lamps, you name it, I probably patched it up at some point." Elizabeth's brows lifted slightly. "You make it sound like your whole family worked together." He chuckled softly, shaking his head with a fond smile. "We did. My sisters were younger, so I took on a lot of the heavier jobs. Mama would hand me a wrench and say, 'Marcus, don't come back until the water's running again.' I didn't always know what I was doing, but failing wasn't an option. That's how I learned, by trying, messing up, and trying again." Elizabeth's heart softened. She could picture it vividly. A young boy hunched over a broken faucet, frustration on his face, determination in his eyes, while his hard-working mother looked on, teaching him resilience in the most practical of ways. She smiled, her voice warm. "You must have been a good son." Marcus paused, his eyes dropping briefly to the ground. "I tried to be, still do. Life hasn't been easy, but I figure if I can make things a little lighter for my mama, my sisters, or even strangers like you, then I'm doing something right." Something stirred inside Elizabeth at those words. For years, she had carried loneliness like a weight. She often told herself that the world had grown colder, that kindness had become rare. Yet here stood a man, decades younger than her, a stranger in every sense, and he spoke of service, of family, of making life easier for others. She hesitated, then opened up a little more. You know, my husband, Robert, he used to fix everything around here. I never once worried about broken lights or squeaky doors. He had this way of making me feel safe, even with the smallest things. Since he passed, I suppose I haven't felt that sense of security. The house feels different without him. Quiet, sometimes too quiet. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she quickly cleared her throat, embarrassed by the emotion that had slipped through. Marcus didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he looked at her with an understanding that seemed far older than his years. Losing someone like that, it leaves a hole nothing else can fill. My mama still talks about my dad every day, even though it's been years. She says grief doesn't really leave. It just changes shape. Some days it's heavy, some days it's soft, but it's always there. Elizabeth's eyes glistened. His words weren't rehearsed or polished. They were raw, honest, and comforting in a way that felt deeply real. That's exactly how it feels, she whispered. For a moment, they simply stood there, two people from different worlds, bound by the shared language of loss. The night air seemed to pause around them, the only sound the gentle hum of the now-fixed light above. Finally, Elizabeth let out a small laugh, shaking her head as though trying to lighten the mood. Listen to us. We've just met, and here we are, talking like old friends. Marcus grinned. Sometimes the best conversations happen with people you don't expect. Maybe because you don't have to pretend with strangers. You can just be yourself. She considered his words. He was right, with neighbors, acquaintances, even her own children sometimes. Elizabeth felt she had to put on a brave face, act like everything was fine. But with Marcus, someone she'd met less than an hour ago, she felt strangely free to be honest. The realization startled her. Why am I so comfortable with him? She wondered. Maybe it was his gentleness, or the way he listened without judgment. Maybe it was simply that, in his presence, the silence of her home felt less heavy. She glanced at him thoughtfully. Marcus, may I ask you something? Do you ever feel judged by the way people see you? His smile faded slightly, replaced by a sober expression. He took a moment before answering. All the time, ma'am. I've walked into hardware stores where people assumed I didn't know what I was doing. I've knocked on doors where folks looked at me like trouble before I even spoke. Some people see my skin, my size, and they decide who I am before I say a word. Elizabeth's heart tightened. She could imagine it. The suspicion, the quick glances, the quiet fear. She felt a pang of guilt, remembering how cautious she had been when she first opened the door. She hadn't meant harm, but she knew her hesitation hadn't been invisible. I'm sorry, she said softly. I must admit, when you knocked, I was unsure too. Not because of you, but because, well, I've grown used to being alone. I've built walls around myself, I suppose. Marcus looked at her gently, shaking his head. You don't owe me an apology. It's natural to be careful, but I appreciate you giving me a chance. Not everyone would have. Those words settled over her like a bomb. In a world where division seemed louder than unity, here they were, an older white widow and a younger black handyman, choosing to see each other for who they were, not for the label society might place on them. Elizabeth felt her shoulders relax, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had lifted. Well, I'm glad I did, she said, her voice firmer now, because if I hadn't, I might never have had this conversation, and I think I needed it more than I realized. Marcus's eyes softened, and for a moment, the corners of his mouth lifted in a quiet smile. Me too, ma'am. Sometimes, fixing a light isn't just about the light. Sometimes it's about shining on the places we don't usually talk about. Elizabeth's breath caught. That was exactly what it felt like, as though the glow of the garage light had illuminated not just her driveway, but also a part of her heart that had been hidden in shadow. They lingered there a while longer, talking about small things and big things alike, her children and sisters, the changing world around them. With each exchange, the invisible walls between them grew thinner, replaced by something far stronger, trust.